The 20th of July, 1969. Three men are hurtling through space at 25,000 miles per hour, 240,000 miles from Earth. No GPS, no internet, no second chance. One wrong calculation and they die in the void forever. 600 million people are watching. The entire world is holding its breath. And then, Neil Armstrong steps onto the moon. But do you know the real story behind that one small step? It's not just about three brave men. It's about war, fear, tragedy, genius, and the most audacious bet in human history. The story doesn't begin on a launch pad. It begins on the 4th of October 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, a metal ball the size of a beach volleyball, into orbit around Earth. Americans woke up the next morning knowing that the same rockets carrying that satellite could carry a nuclear warhead over any American city. The panic was immediate and total. The space race was born not out of curiosity, but out of pure survival instinct. Then came the 12th of April 1961, and the Soviets humiliated America again. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, orbiting Earth in just 108 minutes. President Kennedy, barely 3 months in office, faced the worst geopolitical embarrassment of his young presidency. He asked his advisors one desperate question: is there any space challenge we can beat the Soviets at? The answer came back: a moon landing. The Soviets hadn't started yet. If America moved fast, they could win. On the 25th of May 1961, Kennedy stood before Congress and made one of the boldest promises in political history. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. The room went quiet. At that moment, NASA had exactly 15 minutes of total human spaceflight experience. No American had even orbited Earth yet. The moon rocket didn't exist. The spacesuits didn't exist. Half the science needed hadn't been invented. And Kennedy just promised it in 9 years. It was either genius or madness, possibly both. But it worked. NASA's budget exploded from $500 million to $5 billion a year. At its peak, 400,000 Americans were working on Apollo engineers, mathematicians, seamstresses sewing spacesuits by hand, and young programmers writing software from scratch. Then came the tragedy that nearly ended everything. The 27th of January, 1967. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee climbed into the Apollo 1 command module for a routine pre-launch test on the ground. No fuel, no rocket fire, completely safe. At 6:31 p.m., a spark ignited inside the pure oxygen cabin. Within 17 seconds, all three men were dead. The hatch couldn't be opened from inside under fire conditions. They had no escape. Congressional investigations revealed shocking design flaws, flammable materials everywhere, sloppy wiring, dangerous shortcuts. Some in Congress wanted to cancel the entire program forever. But NASA didn't stop. They completely rebuilt the spacecraft from scratch. Every component redesigned. Every safety flaw corrected. The Apollo 1 fire was a devastating tragedy, but it ultimately made the moon mission possible by forcing NASA to build something truly reliable. Those three men gave their lives, and their sacrifice is written into every successful mission that followed. To reach the moon, you need unimaginable power. The Saturn V rocket, designed by Wernher von Braun, remains the most powerful rocket ever successfully launched in history. It stood 363 feet tall, weighed 6.2 million pounds fully fueled, and burned 20 tons of propellant every single second. The sound at launch was physically dangerous, a mile away. Yet here is the most mind-bending fact about the entire mission: the guidance computer inside Apollo 11 had just 4 kilobytes of RAM. Your smartphone today has 4 billion times more computing power. The real calculations were done by human mathematicians, including brilliant black women like Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, whose extraordinary work made the mission mathematically possible. Without them, Apollo 11 never leaves the ground. At 9:32 a.m., on the 16th of July 1969, 1 million people gathered on Florida's beaches and highways. Another 600 million people, 1/5 of all humanity, watched on television. The Saturn V's 5 engines ignited in a controlled explosion of fire and fury. The rocket barely seemed to move at first, then it gathered speed, cleared the tower, and within 12 minutes, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were in Earth orbit at 17,500 miles per hour. 3 days later, Apollo 11 entered lunar orbit. The crew saw the moon up close for the first time, a barren, cratered, ancient world with no atmosphere, no weather, no sound, just silence and rock, unchanged for 4 billion years. Earth, seen from lunar orbit, was a perfect blue marble, hanging in absolute blackness. Armstrong later said, "You could cover the entire Earth with your thumb, and suddenly you feel very, very small." July 20. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed into the lunar module Eagle and began their powered descent to the surface. Everything was going perfectly. Then, at 6,000 feet above the moon, the onboard computer suddenly flashed a warning, 1202, error. Nobody in Eagle knew what it meant. Mission control went dead silent. Flight Director Gene Kranz quietly asked his 6-year-old guidance officer, Steve Bales, for a decision abort or continue. Bales had seconds to answer. He said, "Go." The error meant the computer was overloaded but still functioning. They pressed on. Then came the next crisis. The autopilot was guiding Eagle directly toward a boulder field the size of a football stadium, rocks large enough to topple the lander and kill both men. Armstrong took manual control with only 60 seconds of fuel remaining. He flew over the boulders, searching desperately for flat ground. At 30 seconds of fuel left, Eagle was still airborne. At 20 seconds, at 15 seconds, then contact light. The Eagle has landed. Houston erupted. Armstrong's heart rate was 150 beats per minute. He had 18 seconds of fuel remaining when they touched down. 6 hours after landing, Armstrong climbed down Eagle's ladder and stepped onto the lunar surface. It was 10:56 p.m. Eastern Time. 600 million people were watching. His words, crackling over 240,000 miles of empty space, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin joined him minutes later and described the view as magnificent desolation. They planted an American flag, deployed scientific instruments, collected 47 pounds of lunar rocks, and spoke with President Nixon in what he called the most historic phone call ever made. They were on the surface for 2 hours and 31 minutes. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited silently above, farther from other human beings than any person in history, completely cut off every time the moon blocked his radio signal. He later said he never once felt lonely. He felt part of something far larger than himself. The return was just as dangerous as the landing. Eagle's ascent engine had exactly one shot to fire. If it failed, Armstrong and Aldrin would be stranded on the moon forever, with no rescue possible. It fired perfectly. They docked with Collins in lunar orbit, transferred the precious moon rocks, and began the 3-day journey home. On the 24th of July 1969, the command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. All 3 men were alive. The mission was complete. Apollo 11 remains the defining achievement of human civilization. The lunar rocks changed our understanding of how the moon and Earth itself were formed. The technologies developed for Apollo gave us scratch-resistant lenses, memory foam, water filters, cordless tools, and the foundation of modern computing. But above all, Apollo 11 gave humanity something less tangible and more powerful than any technology, proof that when we commit fully to something that seems impossible, we can achieve it. Kennedy said they chose to go to the moon precisely because it was hard. That spirit is Apollo 11's greatest gift to every generation that follows. From a spark of Cold War fear to 12 footprints in lunar dust in just 8 years. That is the real story of Apollo 11. We came in peace for all mankind. Plaque left on the moon. July 1969.